V45. I run this engine here on a Old Town C model 1932. This is a 29, same era, and I found myself using it a lot. I really enjoy running the boat. So Larry Carpenter gave us some repair parts when I put this engine together, and included with those parts was a Vacturi carburetor. The Johnson carburetor, which came on this engine, uses a lot of fuel. It's like the Fat 50 of the 20s. I mean, it burned an enormous amount. And I found myself filling a gas tank on a very short little cruise. So I said, well, what the hell? I understand the Vacturi carburetor gave a 30% savings, fuel savings. And I said, yeah, it's probably typical sales stuff, but let's give it a shot. And I was lucky enough to have it work after replacing the diaphragm with 10 millimeter phenolic diaphragm material, and it worked. It had a little leaky inlet needle. It was leaking a little bit at low speed, but I found it gave amazing savings results. So I got into these Vacturi carburetors, so I tried to fix the leaking part, and when I fixed the leaking part, everything went haywire. I couldn't get the carburetor to work. And these things, there was no information available, so I decided to do my own research. And over this summer, I have received 4 carburetors, including this one right here, and I have dug into them and took measurements and figured out how to make them work. And I did get this one. This is another one that was not the one that I started with on this, and I got it to work very satisfactory, as you can see from the film.
So it was offered as an accessory, right? And this is a 1930 Johnson accessory book.
1930, so that would have been come out in August of 1929,
right?
Before the crash.
And they offer this particular carburetor that Lincoln has perfected here as an accessory, and it's quite highly promoted here as to what it offers for advantages.
And this carburetor has no float ball, not like the later Vacturis. This one is strictly atmospherically regulated. The inlet needle runs off the diaphragm. It does not have a float ball or an inlet needle as such. It has a inlet needle that works off of just a piece of flexible material.
Right. So next we're going to go into the details. We're going to move on to another location, and we've got some of these carburetors apart or off where we can actually look at them.
Okay. This is the Johnson carburetor that was originally on the V45. It works extremely well. It has a float chamber and a float that controls the flow of fuel, and it works very well, but it burns a lot of fuel.
And that was used on the S45 as well.
S45 as well. They're identical carburetors.
Yeah.
The same carburetor. I tested both of these, in fact, on my test platform, which was the S45. I put my V45 Johnson carburetor on without adjusting anything. It worked perfectly, so didn't the original Johnson carburetor was on it as well, and they are the same part number.
Right.
So these were basically my test. I used the S45 to figure out how to make these work, because I couldn't. So the information that was available on the Vacturi carburetor was just advertising. And the only thing it said is that gave better gas mileage, which I found to be absolutely true. 30% was definitely a good figure. These carburetors are this junker right here, which I used to rob for parts. It had a lot of frozen things, so I ended up using parts off of it. I will take that apart and show you how it works.
And that was also like the educational one. That was the one that you felt good about. Let's delve right into this thing, take it completely apart, try to make sense of how these things work.
Exactly.
Because as far as I know, nobody's ever studied these before. These are carburetors in their history of antique outboarding that people have just either not used or put aside and replaced with something else.
Because there's no repair manual for them. It's missing out of the Johnson manual. I've been online. I can't find anything really even much on the company. So I decided to do my own measuring and figure out what made them tick. So, first of all, I had three different models. I had, they have a model number on the side, right here. This is 22D200. This one is 24D110. This one is 24D142. And this one is 22D200. So there were two of them that were alike. I had two 22D200s, and the bad one that was badly corroded that I used for the parts, that's the one. It was a 200, and I had another one just like it. So
these were used. I mean, they really appeared in 1930.
1930
or
on the V electric start, they were standard.
Yeah.
On the electric
Right.
start V40,
Right.
V50,
Yeah.
VE50, they were
Right.
standard product. But there's no, they only mention it in the repair manual, but there's no setup, no information, no parts list, no nothing on these things. They just are a carburetor. Now, you notice that I picked up two that had these adapter plates. These are adapters you need to fit them onto the engine. Okay, this one right here has opening, and you could see a restriction way down inside, which is over two tubes, and I'll talk about that later. This one, this adapter here, has a plate, which is the restrictor is way down at this end, different place. The restrictor on this one is way down inside to create the vacuum, and here it's way up front.
Do you
here.
think that this one may have had a restrictor that somebody popped out?
I think it was done at the factory.
Okay.
I do, but I think it's the same restrictor. They just took the plate out of it. But you
Okay.
could see, when you take this apart, you can see where the plate was.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically we had a number of measurements, which I'm going to go into as I take this one apart. This one has, let's see, here's my screwdriver. Here we go. I'm going to disassemble this top piece right here. This is actually a piston, and you can see the chamber. This is a piston which has a access hole. Basically, it's a vacuum that comes up through this hole, and it comes down through this tube, and it comes way back here. So it's on the back side of the restriction. And
So that's really engine vacuum.
correct.
Yeah.
And the engine vacuum's greater at low speed. So at idle, this would be wanting to pull this piston up.
Yeah.
This piston operates another restrictor down in here, which opens the air channel coming into here. So this piston has a fair amount of control over how rich or lean the mixture gets. So let's just take a look inside and see what this looks like. You can see that what I just said a lot better. You can see this, that goes up and down in this chamber right here, and you can see there's the air hole, like the front of the carburetor is right there. And this valve right here opens and closes. It goes down inside of here and opens and closes that opening. So the faster the engine goes, the higher the airflow, and it pulls this thing down. So the vacuum decreases up here, and it pulls down against this spring right here, and opens or shuts that hole depending on how fast you're going. Obviously, the faster you're going, the more open that wants to be. This is the key piece to everything. All four of them had different length springs. I had 3-inch spring, a 4.5, 4.25-inch spring. I had a 3-inch long. I had another 3 7/8 long. So these springs were calibrated, I would guess, at the factory. So this is a very critical piece which in the end controls the amount of closure at idle. This is the idle mixture screw, basically. Instead of controlling fuel, it controls air. But
so in a sense, it's like if you had a regular other type of engine that was lean because of the main jet or something, and you needed to choke it, or you needed your hand to choke it, it's like almost the same thing. You can actually get the engine to run correctly by how much you restrict the air rather than the fuel.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Bill. So there's the key part right there. The two that were the same, 3 inches, was the two 22D200s had different length springs in them. So the two that were the same was a 22D200 and a 24D110. So they were different models. So the spring had to be calibrated to these things. My guess is that was a very complex problem. Probably each carburetor was put on a flow meter of some kind. Okay, now I'm going to show you how the fuel is metered. Not the air, but the fuel. Here's the diaphragm material. This one's been broken, but that's the diaphragm material.
Is that original?
No,
No.
I
Okay,
have
that's
some
one
original right here. You can see the original diaphragm material, which I think is kind of shacked, but it was the best they had at the time. These are original.
Huh.
I made a rubber one and tried that. Didn't make any difference. Worked the same with rubber as it did with the phenolic. And I think that's early phenolic. That was your guess. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I've never tried it with the original.
Yeah.
So
Some people said that some of these, they've seen some of these with a thin metal diaphragm as
that
well.
would make sense to me.
And I've never seen anything like that.
So here we go. This is liftoff. This presses up against the diaphragm to keep it off the inlet needle, which is right here. So I measured the height of these pads right here in all 4 carburetors, and I came up with a fairly wide variation. So I don't think this was key, but I think it was important. And I'll show you how you adjusted that tension right there by taking out the inlet needle assembly. Then I'm going to take the assembly itself apart. But this right here is how you adjusted the tension on this spring. So it would keep it off that from pressing down, because this is where the fuel comes in, is from this little inlet needle right there. And this, you'd obviously have to keep that off or it would flood all the time. So it operates from the vacuum, the demand vacuum from these
nozzles?
Nozzles.
So you can talk a little bit about those
Well,
nozzles.
we'll get to those.
Too.
I'm going to take them out,
Okay,
and we'll
good,
take a
good,
look
yeah.
at them, okay? So I want to explain this part first, right here. So this is the inlet needle. And I'm going to press it, take it apart. Okay, so the inlet needle has a little backing piece back here and a spring that holds it shut. And there we go. And I have got the, what did I do with it? There it is. All right, there's the little backing piece you saw. Here's a spring that sits on top of it. And then this is held up. This is the part that seats. This is the seat right here, this edge. And they do get a little corroded. Some of them do. This one is corroded. And there's the other part of the seat right down there. It's a little ring. This is an early version of the wedge type ones we see now in carburetors. It's a rubber tipped at an angle. This is a flat seat, and it'll only hold about 2 psi. So the thing that I found that was critical was the height of that little top of that needle in relationship to the flat right here. They were all at about 25, let's see where they have here, a depth of right around 25 thousandths. 26 to 25 thousandths, all of them were right in there. And that was a critical measurement. The spring did not seem to be, this spring right here that I'm talking about, this sits like this. That did not seem to be a critical measurement. But the height of the inlet needle sticking out of this thing was very definitely a critical measurement. All right, so I can put that back together again and talk about that. Just a tight.